There's something oddly beautiful about waking up in a quiet house. No voices calling, no clinking of dishes in the kitchen, just morning light spilling across the floor and the soft hush of your own breath. Some would call it empty. But if you've lived enough life, you start to recognize it for what it really is. Peace. Maybe you spent decades putting others first. Children, a partner, work, expectations. Your days were full, yes, but were they ever really yours? And now, here you are, over 60, waking up alone. But something's different this time. The stillness doesn't ache like it used to. It cradles you. You begin to notice how coffee tastes better when no one's rushing you, how you smile at yourself in the mirror, not out of vanity, but from a sense of quiet pride. You've weathered storms. And now, the calm feels like a gift. Today's video isn't about glorifying solitude or pretending it's always easy. It's about the quiet, surprising happiness that can grow when you finally get the chance to live on your own terms. So if you've ever wondered why living alone after 60 might actually feel happier, stay with me. You might just find your own story in this one. Hi there, I'm Michael, and welcome to Comfort Corner, a gentle space made just for you, where life after 60 is seen not as a slow fade, but as a season rich with wisdom, depth, and quiet beauty. Here, we talk about things that truly matter, growing older with grace, nurturing emotional well-being, finding joy in simplicity, and yes, even rediscovering yourself in the stillness of living alone. You know, so many seniors write to me saying, Michael, I never expected to be living by myself at this age, but oddly, I don't feel sad. I feel light. I feel free. And it's in those honest, unfiltered moments that I see what this channel is all about. We're not here to chase youth. We're here to honor the life we've lived and to shape what's ahead with intention and heart. So if you found yourself living alone, whether by choice, by chance, or simply by the rhythms of life, I invite you to stay with me today. We're going to explore the emotional, practical, and even joyful sides of solitude. And if any part of this video resonates with you, I'd love for you to join this growing community. Just click subscribe, leave a comment, or share your story. You never know who might need to hear that they're not alone. Now, let's begin this quiet journey inward and discover why happiness in this season of life might look more like coming home to yourself. There's something profoundly healing about no longer having to set your life to someone else's clock. For decades, your time may have belonged to others. Children needing breakfast at 6 a.m., a partner's work schedule shaping your evenings, or daily routines driven more by obligation than by choice. You woke, moved, ate, and rested according to rhythms that didn't always feel like your own. But now after 60 and living alone, time begins to soften. It stretches out like morning sunlight across the kitchen floor, quiet, unhurried, and beautifully yours. You can eat when you're hungry, not when the schedule says so. You can sleep with the window open, skip the news, or light a candle at breakfast just because it soothes you. What once were compromises are now quiet freedoms. Many older adults describe this transition as a kind of coming home to themselves. And it's not just poetic, it's backed by science too. The National Institute on Aging emphasizes that having control over daily decisions is one of the most important contributors to emotional well-being in later life. When seniors are able to shape their days based on their own preferences and values, their sense of joy and peace increases significantly. You might find yourself developing new little rituals, a morning walk when the world is still misty and quiet, tea at 3 p.m. in your favorite chair with no interruptions, or evenings spent in silence watching the light fade and realizing you feel whole. These aren't grand events, they're gentle acts of presence. And in that presence, many people find something unexpected. Happiness not from what's added to life, but from what's finally allowed to fall away. So if you're living alone and still adjusting, give yourself grace. You're not drifting, you're finally moving at your own rhythm. And that rhythm might be the most honest music your heart's heard in years. It's only when the world grows quiet that we begin to hear the truth of our own hearts. Living alone after 60 often opens up a kind of emotional clarity that's hard to access in earlier stages of life. When the noise fades, the obligations, the constant care for others, the daily decisions shaped by someone else's needs, a deeper, subtler voice begins to rise, your own. And it doesn't always speak in words. Sometimes it comes through memories you hadn't thought of in years, or a sudden wave of peace washing over you in the middle of a quiet afternoon, or even tears, unexpected but honest, as you begin to process decades of giving, loving, losing, surviving. This is the emotional spaciousness that solitude makes possible. In fact, researchers studying older adults have found that intentional solitude often leads to greater emotional clarity and self-understanding. One study, published in the Journal of Aging Studies, found that seniors who spent regular, reflective time alone reported feeling more in control of their emotions and more connected to what truly matters in their lives. You might sit with a photo from years ago, not to mourn, but to honor. You might write in a journal and discover feelings you never had space to name. You might even begin to forgive, not just others, but yourself. And in that forgiveness, in that gentle reflection, something starts to settle. The heart becomes less frantic, less filled with what ifs and more anchored in what is. One woman wrote to our channel recently and said, "Michael, I thought I'd be lonely after my husband passed, but instead I've found something sacred in this quiet. I finally met myself, and she's kinder than I ever imagined." Emotional clarity doesn't always arrive like a bolt of lightning. Sometimes it comes like dew, quiet, soft, and steady. But once it touches your soul, you start to see the world differently, more gently, more truthfully, more gratefully. So if you're living alone and emotions begin to rise, welcome them. They're not interruptions, they're invitations. There comes a quiet liberation after 60, when you finally stop living your life under the weight of the word should. You should be married. You should visit the kids more. You should volunteer, join the club, cook proper meals, look a certain way, behave a certain way. For decades, especially for women and caregivers, life can feel like one long list of silent expectations. You carry them not because you chose them, but because they were handed to you, generation after generation. And when you live with others, those expectations are reinforced in daily ways. But something shifts when you begin living alone. There's no one watching if you skip dinner, no voice commenting on how long you nap, no subtle judgment if you spend the afternoon reading old letters or singing along to music from 1971. Living alone after 60 becomes a kind of gentle rebellion, not loud, not angry, but quietly powerful. It's a reclaiming of space, not just the walls around you, but the space inside your identity. Psychologists call this stage role release, a natural, often overlooked transition where older adults shed lifelong roles: spouse, caretaker, professional, fixer, provider. And in that shedding, you begin to rediscover a person underneath it all. You. A study from the University of Michigan's Institute for Social Research found that seniors who live alone often report higher levels of personal growth and life satisfaction, not because they have less responsibility, but because they finally get to define it on their own terms. It's not always easy. Letting go of roles can feel like letting go of parts of your story, but what replaces them is something more honest, more present. You're not living for approval anymore. You're living for truth. And truth in its purest form is peaceful. You don't have to prove your worth. You don't have to earn rest. You don't have to explain why a slow day feels like a full one. So if you find yourself doing less, speaking softer, or saying no more often these days, don't feel guilty. Feel proud. You're not giving up. You're growing in. And that is a freedom no one can take from you. When you live alone, truly alone for the first time in years, something magical happens. Your home stops being just a place to live and starts becoming a mirror of who you are now. No more compromising over decor choices. No more clutter from other people's habits or hobbies. No more rooms filled with things that no longer speak to your heart. This space, however big or small, finally becomes yours. And that's not just a design choice. It's deeply emotional. According to gerontologists who study the psychology of aging, having control over your living environment, being able to shape it with intention and comfort, is strongly linked to greater feelings of stability, calm, and self-worth. When you walk into a room that reflects your current values, tastes, and needs, your nervous system relaxes. You feel safer, more grounded. So maybe you replace the family dining table with a small bistro set by the window. Maybe you swap out your partner's old recliner for a chair you've always loved but never had space for. Maybe you finally hang that painting you bought for yourself, the one that always made you feel seen. Even the simplest gestures matter. Fresh flowers on a Tuesday, just because. Soft lighting in the hallway at night because it makes you feel calm. A playlist that fills the quiet, not with noise, but with memory and meaning. One woman told me she started lighting a candle each evening before dinner, even if she was alone. It reminds me, she said, that I'm worth showing up for. That's the truth of it. You're not decorating a house. You're crafting an environment that affirms your existence. And when your surroundings reflect who you are right now at this stage in life, it becomes easier to feel at peace, to feel safe, and yes, to feel happy. So if you're living alone and wondering where to start, don't think big. Start with one small corner, one shelf, one wall, one chair that feels like you. Because when your home begins to echo your soul, solitude doesn't feel empty. It feels like belonging. Sometimes living alone after 60 feels like opening a forgotten drawer and finding a piece of yourself you hadn't seen in years. Maybe it's an old watercolor set tucked away behind bills and documents. Maybe it's a dusty guitar or a folder filled with half-written poems. Or maybe it's just the realization that you've spent most of your life caring for others. And now, for the first time in decades, you have time to care for your own joy. This isn't the end of the road. For many, it's a second bloom. According to studies from the Stanford Center on Longevity, people over 60 often report a surprising burst of creativity, curiosity, and personal growth once they retire or begin living independently. That's because emotional bandwidth begins to return. You're not constantly anticipating someone else's needs, and that reclaimed energy has to go somewhere, and often it flows straight back to the passions that once lit you up. One man wrote to me last year and said, "Michael, I started playing piano again. just 10 minutes a day. Now it's the best part of my morning. I'm not performing for anyone. I'm just listening to what my hands remember. Another woman found herself painting birds in the early morning, not to sell, not to post, just because the silence gave her a brush and her soul wanted color. These moments aren't about grand reinvention. They're about permission. Permission to be curious, to tinker, to create, to try without pressure. And here's the beautiful twist. The older you are, the less you care about being perfect, and the more you care about being present. So if you've been living alone and wondering what to do with all this time and space, don't rush to fill it with tasks. Listen, wait, let the whispers of your younger self rise again. Because whether it's gardening, baking, writing, or learning a new language, your passions never really left you. They were just waiting for you to come back. And now that you have, let them bloom. So why does living alone after 60 often feel lighter, more peaceful, even happier? Well, as we've explored together today, it's not about isolation. It's about intention. You're reclaiming your rhythm, finally living on your time, not someone else's. You're discovering emotional clarity, hearing your own heart, maybe for the first time in decades. You're letting go of old shoulds and stepping into a life shaped by truth, not pressure. You're nurturing deeper, more meaningful connections by choice, not obligation. You're creating a space that reflects the real you, not the roles you used to play. And you're rediscovering joy, those quiet personal passions that make your days feel full again. The beauty of this chapter is that it's yours, and you don't have to change everything overnight to feel it. So here's something gentle to try. Pick one small thing this week that reflects who you are now. Maybe it's rearranging a corner of your living room. Maybe it's saying no to a social obligation you don't truly want. Maybe it's taking a quiet walk, not to exercise, but just to feel your breath again. You don't need noise to be alive. You don't need a crowd to be connected, and you don't need permission to feel joy in your own company. Just start with one moment of presence, one choice that honors where you are, and trust. Happiness can absolutely live here, even in the quiet, especially in the quiet. If you've made it to the end of this video, I hope your heart feels a little lighter. Not because everything is suddenly perfect, but because maybe, just maybe, you've been reminded that this chapter of life is full of quiet treasures. Living alone after 60 isn't something to endure. It's something to embrace. It's not an absence, it's a clearing. A space where the truest parts of you finally have room to breathe. There's wisdom in your silence, there's strength in your stillness, and there's joy. Yes, joy in waking up each day with no one to please but yourself. So if this video spoke to something deep within you, if it reminded you that you're not alone in your aloneness, then I invite you, gently, warmly, to share it with a friend, a sibling, someone who might be quietly carrying the same questions you once held. And if you haven't already, I'd love for you to become part of this little circle we're building here at Comfort Corner. Subscribe, leave a comment, share a memory, or just sit with us in this space where being over 60 isn't the end, it's a softer, wiser beginning. And as always, I'm Michael from Comfort Corner, wishing you peace, health, and a heart full of hope.